We'll carry on to Kate's question. And she writes, and this is a tough one. It's a bit of a heartbreaking one, but it's about marriage. And I think she left this on my video, The Silent Marriage Killers. She says, this video was so helpful. Thank you. My question is, what do you do when you've discussed the childcare divide before having kids? But in the reality, it turned out completely opposite. He was supposed to be involved, maybe not perfectly 50-50, but close. But it ended up being only me. He loves cuddles with the kids, but nothing else to do with childcare. And unless I was willing to leave, he wasn't prepared to honor what we originally agreed on. I ended up doing everything: full-time work, the kids, the house, the mental load. The kids were already here, so leaving or not having kids wasn't an option. What options did I have that I might not have seen? I tried to renegotiate our parenting agreements, but I failed. I burnt out many times, and in the end, I left with the kids. Okay, so first of all, I just want to say that I have a lot of empathy for the pain behind this question. I think a lot of people really feel this in the end, right? They feel that they're out of choices, okay? But for the sake of, please God, your future relationships or anyone else watching this, let's talk about what the real options are when you're in a marriage and you feel like you're doing absolutely everything. You're doing the work, you're doing the mental load, you're doing the child rearing, you're doing the homemaking, and you just feel stuck and crushed and used, and it's painful and it's difficult and it's unsustainable and all of those things. And you're saying, wait, we negotiated, we discussed this beforehand. This wasn't the deal. Okay. So let's get really, really practical. And I first just want to disclaim and say that I know that not all of these are going to help with all people. Okay. Many people are not people we can negotiate with. It's not the majority. Okay. The majority of partners, of husbands in particular, we're talking about here, are good, decent people who really want to please their wives, who are willing to make changes, but who need, a partner who's going to communicate well with them, who's going to help them follow through on things, who's going to, help make it real together. And so, there are going to be that small percentage of people who you can't work with, who have some kind of personality disorder, who have some kind of psychiatric disorder, who have a gambling or an addiction or any other, aren't loyal, right? Things that become red lines and potentially things that you can't necessarily work with or come back from in some cases, okay? That is real. And I do want to acknowledge that. But looking back, say he is a decent human being and he doesn't have any of those issues that I just outlined, for the sake of just having this conversation, because I don't know, I'm not in the room with him and I'm not qualified to make those diagnoses. Okay. One of the things that one could do is that you could renegotiate the system. Okay. Not the motivation. So you're not sitting there accusing him of, oh, you don't want to, you're a bad dad. You never try. You don't help me enough. You're not keeping it vague, being like, can you do more? Why am I doing everything? I'm burning out here. Can you not see me? I'm crashing, right? But instead, the shift goes into something very practical, specific roles, like saying, okay, you own bedtime from start to finish. And then the challenge is going to be disappearing at bedtime and making it happen several nights in a row until it actually becomes habit. Okay, so if I'm saying, I'm sorry, what we're doing now is not working. I'm going to burn out. I need more from you. Now you're going to be in charge of bedtime. Okay. And he's like, okay. And then the next night I just end up being in charge of bedtime because he took a phone call, because he went out with his buddies, whatever. Yeah. Okay. But you need to actually stay there, make sure that he's got the reins and leave so that he can step in and do it. Many of us ask for help, but then we do it ourselves. By the way, I see myself do this the whole time with my kids, okay? It's like a meme. I'm like, oh, can you just wash this up while I'm washing it up? Can you just put this away? And I'm putting it away, right? It's like the superwoman, mindset steps in and you take over the very help that you're asking for. So the first thing I would just make sure is, are you not doing the things that you asked him to do and then leaving no space for him to do them? Okay, if that's the case, you've got to move around. Like, you've got to move away. You've got to be out of the picture, physically out of the house is what I'm trying to say, okay? To give him the opportunity to step up. Men who are not given an opportunity to parent because their wives always save them, always rescue them, always do it for them, become incompetent parents, unsurprisingly, right? Because if you don't practice something, you're never going to get good at it. And many of us mothers don't allow our husbands to practice parenting because we're always micromanaging, stepping in, correcting, doing it ourselves. And then we're surprised that they can't do it. That's not good. That's going to perpetuate the problem. Okay, so you want to give him non-negotiable shifts, like mornings that he fully owns, that you're not even there. Like he would literally need to walk out on the kids if you weren't there, then he would be by default, right, de facto, the responsible adult, and he would have to step in, right? So you've got to schedule those responsibilities. People do not change just from being guilted and guilted and guilted. You could spend a decade saying, you don't do more, you don't do enough, I'm doing too much, can you help me more? And it won't change. What they will change from is structure and clarity, okay? From now on, from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Sundays, I won't be home. You are in charge. And then you leg it out of there. And it's chaos the first time. And you come back and the house is a mess and the laundry hasn't been done and the kids have eaten the wrong snacks and they forgot the soccer practice. But then they get into the groove and they start to learn how to pick it up, how to do it, how to manage it. And you've given them the empowerment and the possibility of actually learning how to put into practice parenting skills. Okay. If that is not an option, because you don't feel, safe doing that. Many mothers often feel like, oh, he'll forget things. He'll be on his phone. He won't really watch what he's doing, right? These are all scary ideas, right? And I think if you couldn't bear it, you should give him every opportunity to overcome and to function by himself as an adult, as a dad. Everyone needs to be able to do that. Like every parent needs to be able to manage their kids by themselves for a few hours. And they're never going to know how to do that if they don't first try. So yes, is there a certain level of risk involved? Sure. But there was also a certain level of risk involved when you had your baby first time because you didn't know what you were doing. There was a learning curve. You had to learn. Everybody has to learn somewhere. And if you haven't let him learn, then he's going to be incapable. And that incompetence is going to be a vicious cycle because you're going to be like, I can't leave them with him because he's incompetent. And then you won't leave them with him. And then he won't learn competence. So let him learn competence. That's step number one. Step number two is to outsource. Okay. So, delegate. Right. And this is sometimes the realistic option is to buy back your time if you're doing absolutely everything. OK, when a partner does not step up, sometimes the realistic option is that you pay for help. Right. If you can't get it from grandparents, if you can't get it from your co-op, from your neighbor, from your niece, whatever, then you pay for a cleaner or for meal prep or for babysitter or after school help or for a laundry service or for a weekend mother's helper with a really affordable, 14-year-old who just plays with the kids while you get to do stuff. And that's how you rebuild your capacity, okay, by really removing those tasks, delegating them to other people, by not expecting new behavior from someone who isn't offering it. You say, wait, okay, I thought he was going to be 50-50 with me. It turns out he's not. How am I going to get the rest of these tasks met? Oh, I'm going to delegate them. And I know that comes with a budget attached, right? With a cost attached, and it's not for everyone. But I will say there's bartering, there's cheaper availabilities. We pay a high school student to tutor our kids when we need a tutor. It's half the price, actually a third of the price of an adult tutor, and he does a great job. So there are cheaper ways of doing it. But that's another option for someone who's saying, I don't want to break the marriage apart. I do love this man. I do want him in my life. I don't want my kids to grow up without a father, but nothing's working. I can't get him to do his jobs. And I haven't been able to build competence. Okay, you can delegate. He doesn't have to do everything if it's not working. You don't have to break your home apart. If that's the only issue, you could potentially delegate. The next thing to do is to delete, right? To delete certain things. You have to maybe create minimum standards, okay, and let the rest drop. When you say, well, I thought we'd have 50-50, but in the end, he's not doing his 50, I'm only doing my 50. Okay, so then 50% of the work has to drop. That means we're doing simpler meals. We're doing less housework. The house won't be as squeaky clean as I'd like it to be. We're having fewer commitments. I can't chauffeur them around to different classes. I can't host guests every weekend. I'm going to streamline my routines. I'm going to simplify everything. It's not ideal, okay? But this is one way of preventing burnout during those heavy years with young children. And it's another way of kind of saving a family, keeping a family intact, keeping a marriage intact, because I don't know why he's not pulling his weight, okay? Maybe he's an awful guy and you should leave him. That's possible. Or maybe he's a great guy in other ways, but he's really incompetent with childcare and homemaking, and that sucks. But it's the reality that you have to face, right? Because your agreement to do it 50-50 hasn't worked out that way. And for some reason, we're not managing to get that out of him. Maybe there's a diagnosis there. Maybe there's an invisible disability. I have no idea. Maybe he's just being a jerk and you have to call him out on it and ask him to step up and leave him with the kids, like I said in point number 1. But it could also be that you have too much on your plate, that you are holding standards too high. He doesn't care about how squeaky clean everything needs to be, or I don't know, ironing the sheets or whatever it might be. And so you have to lower your standards. Okay. Again, none of these are going to be perfect, but they're all going to be ways of moving forward with an imperfect reality. Okay. And then the fourth one is to be realistic about your options. People on the internet really love to run their mouth in the comments about, oh, that's why you shouldn't marry a man like that, or you should just leave a man like that. And maybe both of those things might be true in some situations, but life is complicated. And there are lots of, complicating factors to tearing a family apart. Okay, there might be financial factors, deep emotional factors, love that might be there, a lot of other extraneous circumstances that might mean that you would like to keep the home together, and yet you are not managing to call out the higher good in him, the helper, the dedicated father, the dedicated husband, the capable, competent guy. And I will give you every tool I can to call that out in him, for sure. But there are going to be some circumstances where he's not a jerk, he's not a bad man, you do want to stay married, but it isn't working. And so that's when we need to try all of these other things that I'm talking about, okay? But then I want to bring it back down to reality for you and say that sometimes you've got to name the imperfect reality that you're in. Every single choice in life, every choice is a trade-off. Every choice has pros and cons. In every choice, we're giving up on something to choose something else. And here, the healthiest move might be to accept the reality of this relationship, right? You have to kind of compare, okay, do I want this imperfect partnership? Okay, I'm going to stop fighting for my fantasy partnership. I'm going to stop wishing he was someone he wasn't. In the words of Byron Katie, she says, you're wanting a cat to stop meowing. Like, this is just who the cat is. What are you going to do about it? Like, you've tried everything and this is who he is. He's a fully baked adult and this is how he's behaving and nothing's working. So you sometimes have to just emotionally accept this is who I'm married to. If you were married to someone who, God forbid, had a car accident and lost their legs and they were in a wheelchair, you wouldn't keep wishing, oh, I just wish they could walk. I just wish they could walk. Why can't they walk? It's so annoying that they can't walk. I have to walk everywhere. I have to push them everywhere. You would at some point, you'd go through the phases of grieving. And at some point you would come to the point of acceptance where you'd say, this is who he is. This is what he's got. This is how it goes. I have to work with what I've got. Some people are like that. They're in an emotional wheelchair. For whatever reason, they are incapable or incompetent. And it sucks and it's bad. And maybe it's just laziness, or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's some kind of trauma response. I don't know. But when you've tried everything, sometimes you just have to emotionally accept, I'm the default parent. I'm the one who can function like this. You set boundaries with that partner. You lower your expectations of how the household is going to run because you're at 50%, not 100%. You protect your energy and you build your support elsewhere, right? Which is a good idea anyway. You want to disperse support building anyway, but you build family, community, work flexibility, right? So not giving up, okay, but removing that psychic load of always trying to change someone who refuses to change. At some point, you've got to say, he's not going to change. This is who he is. Now, how can I work with it? And then you might even be able to get creative and suddenly see the ways he could help. Okay. Oh, you know what? He's really never going to help with the dishes, or he's always going to leave the laundry or whatever, but he's great at entertaining the kids. You said he loves cuddles. Okay. So maybe he also loves roughhousing. Maybe he also loves playing board games. Maybe he's good at reading books. Can we discover what his zone of genius is? Because one thing I want to give you hope with is that people are good at different things in life and at different stages of child rearing. So some of us are really, really great with newborn babies. We have the patience, we intuit, and we answer their calls responsively and all of that. And other people just see a newborn and they're like, oh, I don't know what to do with this, right? And some people are really great with teenagers. Like, they like the intellectual debates and the discussions, and they want to talk through things, and they want to have, cultural moments with them. And other people just find them, impossible and rude and defiant and exhausting. And so just because at this particular phase in your life, your husband seems like he's, not contributing, doesn't necessarily mean that he couldn't contribute in other ways, in maybe it's not in the mainstream way. Maybe it's not in the way that we always think of like, earning money, taking care of the household. Maybe there's some other thing that he could be amazing at doing, like building the community, creating a lot of fun and memories and creativity, any manner of other way that he might contribute. Okay. But you want to remove that mental load of just trying to change someone who, this is who he is. Like, at some point you've got to believe him, right? I believe in change. I believe people can change until they're, over 100 years old. I really do. I've actually seen that happen. But they have to want to, right? They have to be interested in it. And there's a big limit on how much one can change someone else. Okay. So that's what I want to say here for you. And of course, the fifth option is the option that you ultimately chose, which is leaving. And that's an option too. When we feel that we've exhausted everything, when we feel that staying would be more toxic, more dangerous, more taxing than leaving, then that is something that we do. I think it should be a last resort, right? I think it's a tragedy when homes are broken up and when kids grow up without their parents together. But that's not failure. That's what happens when you've tried everything else, and the cost was your well-being, was your children's well-being, and you couldn't keep living like that. And that is something that also happens. And then we make the most of that situation, right? Then we make the leaving and the rebuilding, the best that it can possibly be. Okay. So I'm sending you a huge hug. You did not fail. You saw the reality clearly. You fought for it. You tried. And ultimately you made the choice that kept you and your kids safe, sane, stable. And the only mistake that I see that some women make in that situation is thinking that they have zero options, that it's binary. Either I stay and I'm surrendered and I'm just like a victim and I'm a doormat and everyone uses me and I'm burnt out, or I leave. But the truth is that there are several options in between. There's all sorts of levels of negotiation, of work, of trying that could lead to really good results. I've seen them lead to good results. None of them are perfect. And that's the important thing to realize. Leaving isn't perfect. Staying isn't perfect. All of the options in between are not perfect. There are trade-offs. There are prices to each of these. But some of them can be, a good result in an imperfect situation. Okay.